Hey, what's happening? This is Brian Dawson. Thanks for tuning in to this week's segment of Triangle Empowered. Triangle Empowered, where knowledge is power. This week and the entire month of January, we'll be focusing on human trafficking. January is National Human Trafficking Awareness Month. And for those who do not know, North Carolina consistently ranks in the top 10 states in the country for human trafficking. Let that sink in. Also, it disproportionately affects women of color. That's very near and dear to me. So with that today, I've set the stage. Let me welcome in my guest. I'm so excited because she's such a friend of mine. Her name is Kiricka Yarbough Smith. Let me make sure I get your title right. Human Trafficking Program Director with the North Carolina Council for Women and Youth Involvement and the North Carolina Department Administration. Hey.
Hi, how you doing, Brian?
Did I get that right?
You got it right. That was a lot of words. Sorry.
Thank you for joining me. Happy New Year.
Same to you.
Okay, thanks for being a part of this segment. I've had an opportunity to experience being in your presence, and I know the passion that you have for this subject. So let's just start from the top. Okay, what is human trafficking?
Yeah, so when we're talking about human trafficking, I'm going to try to give you the simplest definition. Really, it's just when people are being tricked, fooled into either performing things like sex acts or labor. When we're talking about it, though, it's normally when they're being forced to do it against their will. But the thing that people don't always realize, Brian, is that if somebody is under the age of 18 and they're involved in any form of commercial sex, so that's like strip clubs, pornography, having sex with people for money, if they're involved in anything like that, it's automatically considered human trafficking.
That is so weird. And you would think North Carolina wouldn't be ranked so high. Was that kind of, were you as surprised to hear that? As I am?
Only because, I've been doing human trafficking work in North Carolina since probably about 2007. And so I have had a job working solely in human trafficking since then. So I'm not surprised, but I understand why people are. We don't really have a lot of data specifically around North Carolina and trafficking. But, Brian, what we've seen is that North Carolina has consistently ranked in the top 10 states for trafficking, according to the Polaris Project and some of our other federal partners. And I think the biggest thing is thinking about, why does trafficking happen so much in North Carolina? What we see a lot is, from our highways, 85, 95, 40, they all run through North Carolina.
That's
and
right.
They all, if they all meet in Fayetteville too. So we see trafficking happening a lot because of that. We have a large gang population in North Carolina. Also large rural areas for agriculture where it's easy for people to hide and really continue to do things like human trafficking and not be detected. Right. We have a large military presence in North Carolina. And so we always say, we're not saying that trafficking happens, because military, they're trafficking people, but we have a large transient moving population when we're looking at the military. And so a lot of times that can cause us to kind of lose count of people and not know what's happening. So those are some of the main reasons that we see trafficking happening so much in North Carolina, outside of just some of our port cities that we see, like Wilmington and around our beaches, where we see people being brought in all the time to perform work or sex acts.
So obviously our location is important to be in a corridor with 95, if you touched on that. Talk about some of the signs, because it's around us and I guess we just don't see it. What are some of the signs that people should be looking for?
When we're talking about human trafficking, it really could be a lot of different signs. A lot of times it depends on whether we're looking at our youth or we're looking at adults. But, when we're thinking about our youth in particular, a lot of times we see things like low academic performance in school. They're skipping school a lot. They're hanging out with older crowds. Sometimes it might not even be someone necessarily who is an older person, but they are hanging out with a completely different friend group than they normally would. So if they're normally hanging out with, people who play sports, for instance, but now you see them hanging out with people who are typically known to use drugs a lot and things like that, you want to think about, why is this happening? A lot of times we're seeing a lot of our youth in particular running away. And it used to be, I spent a lot of time in mental health before this. And it used to be, we always ask, why were people running away? But now we need to also ask, what are they running to when they leave? And so we see a lot of people running away from home. A lot of times we see people with a lot of unexplained bruises. They're in places and they don't necessarily know their surroundings and where they are. So those are some of the things I would say are big things. if they're using certain terms, like we might hear some of our youth or young adults using words like daddy, and it's not a parent or a trick or things like that. Those are some of the other things that we see. Also, people who might have a lot of branding or tattoos. But in particular, if we see them, and you might see 2 or 3, let's say, young ladies who have the exact same tattoo or microderm piercing, which is sort of that thing they might have in like their cheek or above their eye. If you see several of them have that in sort of the same place, a lot of times that's something you want to think about. Trafficking could be occurring.
Wow, interesting. In case you just jumped in, we have Kiricka Yarbough Smith, all right, hanging out with us. We're talking about human trafficking. She is the Human Trafficking Program Director with the North Carolina Council for Women and Youth Involvement, the North Carolina Department of Administration. Let's talk about COVID and its effects on human trafficking in North Carolina and across the country. How have you seen the differences since, we've all been under this cloud of COVID and it's been affecting every aspect of our life? How has it affected human trafficking?
Absolutely. So when we're looking at COVID-19, we may not necessarily be seeing an increase in human trafficking cases, but human trafficking is already something that's hidden. And so we do see where, of course, it's going to be even more hidden, like things like domestic violence, child abuse. Also, we see trafficking happening a lot online. And so now that we've seen our students and more remote learning happening and all these things are moving online, unfortunately, now we're giving predators 24/7 access to our children. And so we definitely see an increase in kids who are being even more isolated. And one of the biggest things that we talk to parents about being careful about outside of the internet usage with children is making sure they don't feel isolated and alone, because that's sometimes why traffickers target them. And so now a lot of our kids, that's how they feel. So they are online all the time, and the predators know that, and they're in games, and they're, in things like Fortnite and some of the other games that our kids are playing constantly. And so, yeah, it's really important for us to make sure that we're supervising them during this time.
I mean, great answer, Kiricka. You jumped over to my last and final subject, which is pretty broad. But as a parent, how do we look for it with social media? Because it's hard to keep up with all the, now you got TikTok. I mean, you got Facebook, you got Instagram, you got so many new ways for these kids to communicate. And as soon as we get on one, they jump to another. So what are some of the signs we need to look for as parents and as regards to social media?
Yeah, so true. Because I know we do a lot of training for youth, especially teenagers. And one of the things they've told me before, if I say, oh, we're on, I know you're on Facebook, they'll say something like, no, that's for old people. So yeah, as soon as we jump on something, they move. But it's really about having things to kind of help monitor. One, it's about having those conversations with your kids. Two, one of the things that I always suggest is not allowing a young person to take their phone in their room at night. So it shouldn't be that a parent is asleep and the phones and their tablets and all those things are in their room. Have them charge them, whether it's downstairs in the parent's room. Have a cutoff time, especially on school days that you have access to that, but they don't. Also, a random check is not a bad thing, but there are also apps now like the app Bark. We always recommend that. The app Bark is something that you can download on your phone and your child's tablet or their phone.
And the app again? I'm sorry to cut you off. Say that app again.
That's okay. It's called Bark. BARK. Bark.
Yeah.
And you can use that and really monitor your child's internet usage. And they're even offering, 2 free months for parents in North Carolina right now. And we can even, and it's something that you can pay for later, but right now it's something that at least you could have to just start monitoring. But there's also several apps that are free to do the exact same thing.
Kiricka, you're giving us so much great information. I got to sneak in one more question. We talked about how it's really affecting people of color. Let's talk about that angle real quick.
Yeah. So, I think one of the things that we don't think about is when we look at trafficking, it happens a lot to young women and girls of color in particular. And the bad part is one of the things that we've seen is it happens more to them because who's looking? And so a lot of times they look for victims, traffickers look for victims that they think they may not get in as much trouble for, or that someone may not be looking for, like a person of color or someone who is in foster care or child welfare system. And so we see that a lot. And then we have a lot of people who are living in poverty, and traffickers know that. So they go around and they are offering them things like, whether it's food or clothing, but also just driving around, say, in a nice car saying, I can give you all these things. Or would you like to take a trip? I'll take you on this trip, but these are the things you're going to have to do if I take you. And it's so hard, it's so easy for our young people to get caught in this. And when we talk about what trafficking really looks like, it's just important for people to start really understanding the signs of human trafficking and the difference in what's real and what's kind of sensationalized.
Wow. So Kiricka, obviously they can jump on our websites for more information, but is there any website, contact number that you can give out to our viewers today who may, want more information, or who may be in this situation and they want to get out?
Yeah, absolutely. I always suggest to people, you can always go to your website. You can go to our website at the Council for Women. You can just put in Council for Women and Human Trafficking and find us really easily. But the other thing is we have the National Human Trafficking Hotline. And so they can call that number. And that number is 1-888-373-7288. Again, it's 1-888-373-7288.
January is National Human Trafficking Awareness Month. Every day, this is a major problem in America. Thank you for what you're doing on the front lines. Again, I've had a chance to, do a project or two with you, so I've seen your passion for this subject matter. We could talk about this so much more, and thank you for what you're doing.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for just understanding the importance of getting this information to our community, Brian.
I look forward to continuing this conversation. Thank you so much again, Kiricka. You've been excellent. Triangle Empowered, where knowledge is power.